Welcome to Alaska's Native Voice. I'm Antonia Gonzales. People from communities across the state are gathering virtually this week to address many critical issues of public policy and government. Topics range from hunting and fishing to health, safety, and education, to land and water and energy. Those taking part in the 2020 Alaska Federation of Natives annual convention are tuning in to hear both live presentations and pre-recorded videos. COVID-19 has impacted tribal communities across the state as leaders continue to advocate for resources. Work continues amid the pandemic to address issues facing their communities. Alaska Native cultural teachings, wisdom of elders, and Indigenous resilience are helping many people get through these difficult times. Join us to hear from some leaders and policymakers next on Alaska's Native Voice.
Reporting from the 2020 Alaska Federation of Natives Convention in Anchorage, Alaska, I'm Alice Kaniklen. The coronavirus took center stage during day one of AFN. Alaska's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Ann Zink, recalled the historic impact of the 1918 pandemic on the Alaska Native community.
I think there's some real similarities. The difference is that we have new tools now. We have testing, we have a better understanding of science collectively, and then we have tools to be able to try to minimize the spread.
One of those tools is vaccination.
We don't know which vaccine is going to come out first. We don't know the recommendations for which age group or which population, but we want to be ready.
Zink said the state will submit a vaccination plan to the Center for Disease Control on Friday and expects limited vaccination distribution in Alaska by the end of the year. 60% of patients who seek care at the Alaska Native Medical Center come to Anchorage from outside of Alaska's road system. To prevent the risk of COVID spread, ANMC's Director of Community and Health Systems Improvement, Dr. Robert Anders, said they have changed up the intake process from the time a patient is admitted until they're released.
I think we still can deliver care very safely. Many of these care needs that are being delivered day to day at ANMC can't be delayed another 6 months. They need to get addressed. They need to have surgery. They need to have other procedures done. They need to come into Anchorage, and we need to figure out a way to do that safely.
During the morning panel, medical professionals recommended everyone consider getting a flu shot this year. The Council for the Advancement of Alaska Natives has also submitted a resolution to the AFN board to prioritize vaccination for vulnerable and underserved populations. The resolution also calls for a 100% flu vaccination rate for all Alaska Natives. The pandemic was also a key talking point for Alaska's senior sitting U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski. She says the pandemic has put a spotlight on the inequalities of services and care available for many rural Alaskans.
We have seen with COVID-19 a spotlight, and one of those spotlights has really served to highlight the inequality in our country in a multitude of different ways. And we see that anger and frustration over these inequities manifest in racial tensions across the country. And it challenges all of us to ask the broader question, how do we address inequality in our country? And I think it starts by acknowledging inequality and the challenges facing people of color.
During her address, Senator Murkowski says that adequate broadband has a disparate impact on children required to learn virtually. She also says low-income service sector workers have been hit hard, and that minor communities often see higher death rates and limited access to care and services. In her address, Murkowski turned to a topic of discussion that dominated much of the afternoon: public safety and missing and murdered Indigenous people. Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs Tara Sweeney spoke about the Trump administration's work in Indian country and the institution of Operation Lady Justice, a federal task force dedicated to working toward missing and murdered Indigenous women solutions. Sweeney also pointed to the state and local level efforts that are crucial in helping bring these issues to the attention of the federal government.
In addition to the efforts at the federal level, there have been many strong, effective local advocates who have worked these issues for decades. Elevation of these issues to the national platform would not have been possible without their advocacy and tireless efforts. Thank you for providing a voice to the voiceless and serving as a guiding light for policymakers.
On day 2 of the Alaska Federation of Natives Convention, U.S. Congressman Don Young and U.S. Senator Dan Sullivan are expected to give their addresses, and AFN will announce its President's Awards as well. Sullivan will also participate in Senate candidate interviews, as well as independent candidate Dr. Al Gross. The Alaska Federation of Natives will likely announce the election of a new AFN co-chair to assume the seat being vacated by Will Mayo. Special thanks to KNBA's Trip Krause and freelance producer Emily Schwing for contributing to this report. In Anchorage, I'm Alice Kanik-Glenn.
The AFN newscast is produced by KNBA and Kowanik Broadcast Corporation. Support provided by the Siri Foundation, Cook Inlet Lending Center, South Central Foundation, Chalista Corporation, Manilik Association, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and Rasmussen Foundation. This is a production of KNBA, Kowanik Broadcast Corporation, and Native Voice One, the Native American radio service.
This is Alaska's Native Voice. I'm Antonia Gonzales. COVID-19 has presented many challenges when it comes to education, conducting business, and health and safety of communities across Alaska. Yet, work by Native leaders, policymakers, grassroots groups, and others continues amid the pandemic. The Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, known as the CARES Act, was passed by Congress and signed into law in March to provide assistance to people across the United States. $8 billion was included in the relief package for tribes, which included Alaska Native corporations. That led to lawsuits from tribes in the lower 48 and some in Alaska, claiming they're not eligible for the funds because it should be for federally recognized tribal governments. In September, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled in favor of tribal governments, and that Alaska Native corporations, regional and village, cannot qualify as an Indian tribe. Alaska Native corporations in statements called the ruling flawed, and Alaska's congressional delegation disagreed with the ruling. While tribal leaders, including Mike Williams, chief of Akiak Native Community, says the funding should be in the hands of tribes. Williams says the issue has caused fighting, which should not be the case, as Alaska Native communities continue to deal with COVID-19 and provide much-needed services to community members.
My name is Mike Williams. I'm the chief of the Akiak Native community currently, and we have a population of over 500 tribal citizens here in Akiak, and I've been serving on the Tribal Council for over 40 years.
Let's start off by talking about how COVID-19 has impacted Alaska, especially Native communities. How has it impacted your community?
It has given us a lot of anxiety and a little bit of unrest here, and it has been a scary time for us in Akiak. So we instituted very strong policies of traveling outside of Akiak. We encourage everybody to stay home, and whenever they come back from traveling out, they are required to have to be in quarantine. So it's very chaotic to all of our communities in Alaska. So our tribal governments have been doing a very good job after they received that CARES funding, and that really gave us relief. In these times when we institute very strong policies that impact our communities. So it's been very helpful.
And let's talk a little bit more about the CARES Act. The $8 billion was included in the CARES Act for tribes, and there's controversy and litigation surrounding the inclusion of Alaska Native corporations. Tribes in the lower 48 and some in Alaska claim ANCs are not federally recognized tribal governments and don't qualify for CARES Act dollars. Can you explain your stance?
Yes. Clearly, from the beginning, I wrote a letter that those only on a annual tribal list should qualify to receive that funding. And I think there was some kind of allowed with the Indian Self-Determination Act to include the Alaska Native corporations. They are state chartered and not tribal governments. And at that Native community, we've been looking at the issue ever since 1971, and especially when the tribal list and recognition took place in 1993, 1994. It solidified the existence of our federally recognized tribes in Alaska. So there's 229 federally recognized tribes in Alaska that are that have government-to-government relationship with the federal government, whereas the Native corporations are for-profit corporations that in a settlement that it took place in 1971 that extinguished our hunting and fishing rights, that left out the children that were from the shareholder list that were born after December 18, 1971, and the management of our lands were given to the Alaska Native Corporation Board of Directors to manage under this under the for-profit corporation that is state chartered under the state of Alaska. We know that that the village and regional corporations are not governments, and we stood by that, and we understood that CARES Act, it was for 574 tribes in the nation to receive this CARES Act money, but unfortunately, we're at a place where litigation took place, and it should never the Native community should never come into this position of fighting, quote unquote, fighting amongst each other. And but I think we need to avoid that at all costs. And ever since the first, ever since 1492, our people from the East Coast to Alaska have experienced, issues, losing our lands and et cetera. And we've endured the pandemics and also these diseases that were brought from outside, and of course we experienced all that with those unnecessary deaths that occurred to our people, and we're still kind of trying to recover from that. But I'm glad that we have 229 federally recognized tribes that are strong and know what to do about the issues in the community.
And can you touch a little bit on why you think, or why the CARES Act funding should be in the hands of tribal governments? How does that help tribal governments directly respond to COVID-19?
We, the tribal governments, provide essential services. All the governmental services we receive from the Department of Interior, and we provide public safety. We provide education, we provide tribal courts, we provide health care and other services, governmental services to our citizens. And we have been doing that government to government contracting and compacting and at times we allow to create nonprofits to provide service to our villages, but we did not lose that sovereign authority, and that sovereign authority is we can allow nonprofits or profits to work for us under a authorizing resolution by our federally recognized tribe, and that's what we've been doing since 1975 with the Indian Self-Determination Act.
What was your reaction to the ruling by a federal appeals court in late September that sided with tribes on the ANCs that they do not qualify?
I commend the three judges for that positive 3-0 decision, and I think they are very correct that Native corporations are not federally recognized tribes or tribal governments, and I think that explains it very clearly, and I applaud their thoughtful decision, and hopefully that it will stop there, and we need to work together with our Native corporations and our nonprofits, and every one of us in Alaska, we need to work together. And this issue should not split us apart. And along with our brothers and sisters from Lower 48, we need to work together. We need to support each other. And this issue should never split us apart.
Tribal gatherings, conferences, events, which have either been postponed or canceled. Do you have a message of encouragement as a tribal leader, as business, as school, and just as Alaska Native way of life continues amid the pandemic?
Yeah, all of us have been affected, and ACTAC Native community is a member of in good standing with Alaska Federation of Natives, and it is with this issue of pandemic and not being able to be in the meeting in person, and we had our annual ABCP convention here with our nonprofit, and we'd love to be together in Anchorage or Fairbanks. It's where the annual AFN conventions have been held, and to talk about our issues in person. So we need to continue to utilize the technology to continue to work on our issues, because we cannot afford to rest a little bit because of restrictions and large gatherings that may affect our health, and so I commend the virtual meetings, statewide, regional meetings, and also national meetings with the National Congress of American Indians, which we're going to be attending.
That was Mike Williams, Chief of the Akiak Native Community, sharing thoughts on COVID-19 relief aid. Meanwhile, Alaska's congressional delegation is critical of the Circuit Court ruling against Native corporations. In September, U.S. Senators Lisa Murkowski and Dan Sullivan and Congressman Don Young, in a statement, said they disagree on the decision by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit determining Alaska Native corporations are ineligible for tribal assistance in the CARES Act. U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski says the tribal set-aside was created to provide relief for all Native American and Alaska Native people, regardless of how they receive aid. Here's Senator Murkowski.
I appreciate the opportunity to have a discussion. This is something we very intently focused on when we first began initial discussions of COVID relief funding. In those preliminary discussions about the CARES Act, it was very important to me to make sure that as we provided relief for individuals, for healthcare facilities, for schools, that we also recognize our tribal communities, we recognize our tribal governments. And so initially, we were dealing with I hesitate to say it, but I will. We were dealing with the kind of the standard response when it comes to many of the funding priorities within Indian country. They just weren't receiving an equitable amount. And it was an initiative that I engaged early on and worked aggressively to make sure that there was not only a tribal set-aside, but that it was a substantial amount. I argued for in excess of the $8 billion that we were able to successfully insert in that. But $8 billion, I think we all acknowledge, is historic. And that was the good news. We further, as a delegation, made a very early point to ensure that when we were talking about the relief to be distributed, that it would encompass all the different ways that that services are provided within the state of Alaska, recognizing that we have a much more complex arrangement provided through our federal laws, through ANCSA, in terms of tribes and tribal governments, making sure that we included a definition that was specific to include all layers of tribal entities, all layers of relief for Alaska and Native people. So we, the delegation, included this tribal set-aside that we felt addressed Alaska's unique tribal governance structure to specifically include ANCs as eligible for that aid. So you mentioned the September decision from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit that had determined that ANCs are ineligible for tribal assistance through the CARES Act. This overturns not only the June decision by the U.S. District Court, but really goes directly contrary to what the Alaska delegation had intended and had specifically included in that legislation. What we wanted to ensure is that we're talking about the services under the federal trust responsibility, as well as protecting Indian self-determination in the state of Alaska. And so we took a very holistic view of how the sovereign tribes and the ANCs, we acknowledge that they serve different purposes, but we wanted to ensure that all those who receive services would be covered through these CARES funds. So as we look to how the services have been provided, this is not This is not a situation of trying to replace lost revenues. This is a full effort to support the cost of responding to the pandemic. So we are obviously very concerned about the court's ruling from the U.S. Court of Appeals because the implications, if this were allowed to stand, would basically withhold relief from a subset of Alaska Native people simply because of the unique tribal system that we have in Alaska. And I am greatly concerned that if it stands, it erases more than 45 years of precedent and practice and has the potential to undo the tribal systems of healthcare, of housing, education, workforce development. There's just so much more there.
And so, Senator Murkowski, as litigation continues, how are lawmakers, including the Alaska delegation, looking to include Alaska Native people in any current or future COVID-19 relief packages?
Well, we are, again, we've got the litigation that is continuing. The delegation had participated in an amicus brief when it went to the D.C. Circuit Court, and that litigation will continue for purposes of further COVID relief. And I appreciate that you phrased it that way because it is my absolute strongest belief that more relief is necessary, not only in Indian country. Here in the state of Alaska, we look to our very, very struggling economy. We're seeing a spike in cases that we just haven't seen in months. We're going in a direction that we had hoped not. We are not done with COVID yet. And so additional relief will be required. So just as we did with CARES and with the supplemental CARES that followed it, making sure that tribal programs will be able to receive level of services, whether it's tribal health, whether it is making sure that we are extending the special diabetes program, some of the housing initiatives, the nutrition initiatives, with food distribution programs on reservations. There are so many different provisions that we are looking to in the next round. One thing that I think is absolutely key and critical, and I believe that we do have good support going forward in the next round of relief, is the need to extend the time period to incur costs under the Tribal Relief Fund. This has been expressed as a priority in every gathering that I have been part of. As I was speaking with folks in the Doyon region yesterday. This is so important for us in Alaska, where everything happens in season. We've got food gathering, ordering supplies, shipping, construction. Most materials for any type of infrastructure are ordered in large quantities. They require barge shipping. This is now October, and we've seen the last of the barges that will be going up into the interior in many parts of the state. And so we have villages that are very concerned about the short window of time to purchase and deliver the supplies that they need by freeze-up. We don't have a construction season that is year-round. And so these are just practical realities. I heard in a conversation yesterday with a gentleman from the community of Northway. He says, right now, the law says that we have to spend these dollars by the end of the year, but we don't know how we can do them
That was U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski talking about her support for Alaska Native corporations receiving CARES Act funds of the $8 billion set aside for tribes. You're listening to Alaska's Native Voice. Welcome back to Alaska's Native Voice. I'm Antonia Gonzales. We're talking about how COVID-19 has impacted tribal communities in the state, including litigation involving Alaska Native corporations' inclusions of the $8 billion set aside for tribes. U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski is discussing her support of ANC's getting federal relief dollars.
In this next round of relief, we will ensure that not only there are additional resources to come, but those resources can be spent in a manner that is sound and sensible and enduring. If we are trying to ensure that we're meeting the health and sanitation needs, and we have communities where washing your hands is not a practical reality because they do not have running water. The limitation on sanitation is very, very restricted, and we're in a position where we can't spend these COVID-related funds on that because the construction season is just ready to close out for you, and you haven't been able to get the materials. It doesn't make sense. So we want these funds to be spent wisely, but we recognize that we've got limitations. And I know that this is not just unique to Alaska, but in parts of the lower 48 as well. So we'll continue to push on this and for broader relief.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Senator Murkowski. I appreciate it. And just real quick, if you had an AFN message or Elders and Youth message that you're hoping the work continues despite the pandemic, and there's a lot of issues being discussed, climate change, resource development. I mean, you name it, the list is long.
I think the theme for youth and elders this year is particularly relevant. It speaks to making a good path and a reminder that our elders have shown us how to preserve and to really persevere and thrive throughout history. We learn from those lessons, and that leads to the innovations that we see today, the innovation that will allow us to move through these difficult times that we're seeing with this pandemic. And so I know that these gatherings virtually are a challenge for many. They are strange and foreign in so many ways. But it is important for us to remember that the best that comes from youth and elders, the best that comes from AFN is the convening of friends and acquaintances and hearts and stories. And while we won't be able to do the hug, we can still share in the stories. We can still share in the support. And this remarkable gathering of Alaska Native peoples on an annual basis is a strong reminder of the best in all of us. So I'm looking forward to participating throughout the week and would invite others to join us as well.
That was U.S. Senator Lisa Murkowski talking about her support for Alaska Native corporations receiving CARES Act funds of the $8 billion set aside for tribes. The U.S. Treasury has completed making CARES Act payments to tribal governments other than the Alaska Native corporations due to litigation. According to a recent Treasury Statement of Accounts, more than $533 million has been held back by the Treasury and has yet to be disbursed. The Congressional Native American Caucus is calling on the Treasury Department for the funding to not expire. President Trump signed the Not Invisible Act and Savannah's Act into law this month. The two bills are aimed at addressing the missing and murdered Indigenous women's crisis. The Not Invisible Act creates an advisory committee on violent crime composed of law enforcement, tribal leaders, federal partners, service providers, and survivors. They'll make recommendations to the Department of the Interior and the Department of Justice. Savannah's Act is named in honor of Savannah LaFontaine Graywind, a 22-year-old pregnant woman who was tragically murdered in 2017. Savannah's Act addresses the troubling increase in missing and murdered Native women by creating new guidelines for responding to such cases. As advocates praise work by lawmakers, they also say more still needs to be done. In addition, advocates in Alaska say COVID-19 and emergency orders and precautions have made the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous people worse, and they're raising safety concerns for Alaska Native women. Staff members with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center talk about COVID-19 and the safety of women and children in communities across the state.
My name is Deborah O'Gara, and I'm the Policy Specialist for the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center.
My name is Janelle Chapin. I'm the Program Specialist with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center.
My name is Candy Callan. I'm the Communications Coordinator for Alaska Native Women's Resource.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining me for the program Alaska's Native Voice. Talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has impacted some of the challenges and concerns you've heard when it comes to violence and public safety.
This is Janelle. I can go ahead and start. So at the beginning of when COVID hit in March, we had a lot of new advocates throughout the state coming on board as a result of the tribal set-aside for the Office Against Violence of Victim Crime. And those new advocates were not as able to get training as they would have been otherwise prepared. So we have done a lot of training virtually with our advocates to different regions of the state, whereas we normally would have done regional training in person. A lot of our advocates throughout the state have really had to learn as they go, as well as they're seeing an increase in the number of cases, as well as an increase in the lethality of the cases that they are seeing.
I think really the main message that we want to send folks is that already we live in a state where the rates of domestic violence, sexual assault, and just general violence, especially in our villages, and certainly the issue of trafficking in our major hub areas was high before COVID hit in February and March, and an already bad situation has already gotten worse. And the difficulties, I think, what Janelle was talking about as well, is that with the COVID with the travel restrictions and the lack of transportation, and just the general lack of resources that are being able to get into our homes and into our communities, has made a really bad situation even worse. And we may not even know the scope of the increased amount of violence against women and against children until after we are able to lift the travel and restriction we're trying our best to keep in touch with as many folks as we can and make sure that we're getting as many resources in, and that certainly becomes a difficult task, but we're doing the best that we can, and keeping in touch with folks to make sure that they know things like our statewide helpline has increased the hours so that there's somebody that if somebody's in crisis, mental health crisis, they can have somebody to call. If a limited amount of things that we can do other than keep in touch and make sure that folks are getting the help that they need if at all possible.
And Candy, do you want to expand on how the pandemic has impacted the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Alaska?
I think what Deborah is saying goes with that too, is like not having as much access, not being able to go face to face and speak. In the state, there's not like there are a lot of different resources, or has historically been.
There's the numbers are increasing. There was 5 recently in Fairbanks. There's 2 currently in Nome with active searches going on. And I'll say that the other thing that's increasing, and again, we won't really know the numbers. Some of the numbers that we're expressing to you are numbers that we know of, but we also know that we don't get reports on everything, but we also are getting high incidences of domestic violence in the homes that are just going unreported because of the shutdown from COVID. Unfortunately, folks are not just women, but also children are being forced to hunker down in homes. Abused children, neglected children who were at least had an opportunity to be seen or have some intervention come in because teachers or school administrators would have eyes on them. In some places where the schools are not yet open and they're supposed to be doing homeschooling or online schooling, there's nobody putting eyes on the children. The same situation is for women who are in abusive situations. And I think that's leading to the increase of murders and homicides that Janelle was saying. And again, we don't know what those are or how much they are, but it's a direct result. And I just want to underscore the numbers were already high before 2020 started, and they've only increased at a more rapid rate.
And so what can people do now if they're in need of services or resources during COVID-19?
So as of right now, all of our shelters throughout the state are still open. They do have different COVID precautions in place on how they bring someone into shelter. So they can reach out to the tribal shelters as well as the state-run shelters. There are many advocates in communities, so they could check with their local tribal council to find out if they have advocates or where the best place to reach an advocate might be. They can reach out to us and we can help them get in contact with an advocate in their region or their area that would know better resources for them. We serve the entire state, and so we have a wide network of advocates that we work with. But we really believe that our communities themselves have the answer to resolving and lowering these numbers.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Janelle is saying, that the best thing to do is the really important message is if you are in an unsafe situation or you are needing some assistance, do not assume that the shelters are closed. Do not assume that there is not help. Call for help. You can call the helpline. You can call us, as Janelle said, and call to get referrals. Even if transportation in and out of your village does not appear to be available, call anyway, because something may be able to work. The trick is, as it is now, it was the same before COVID hit us is speak out and ask for help.
It's Candy. So the helpline that Deborah is talking about is the Strong Hearts Native Helpline, and the number is 1-844-7-NATIVE, and that is a great resource for people to be able to call and speak to an advocate. 1-844-762-8483.
So we know that we are living in unprecedented times, and oftentimes with having to isolate or be in our communities and reach out for help, we know it is harder now than ever to speak out and find help. But please know that we're all still here and we're all still working.
Yes, and this is Deborah. And in closing remarks, I would just say that yes, things are worse than they ever were, but they will get better. And I think we just want to urge people to speak up, call for help, keep an eye on your neighbors, keep an eye on your family. If you suspect that there might be something happening, speak up for those who might not be able to speak up, and ask for some help.
And this is Candy, and I just want to say the same, that it's important for advocates to realize that we as the AKNWRC, the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center, we are here and are a resource for them. So if there are issues that they're struggling with, or they're having a hard time figuring out how to provide the help that they need to for a woman who is struggling or is in a domestic violence relationship, they can always reach out to us to help troubleshoot or see what kind of resources there are available if they're not aware of them themselves.
Those were some staff members with the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center talking about COVID-19 and how it's impacting the safety of women and children across Alaska. The Resource Center is expressing to the public, if you're in an unsafe situation or are in need of assistance, do not question if the shelters are closed or assume there's not help. They're urging people to speak out and ask for help. The Strong Hearts Native Helpline is 1-844-7-NATIVE. Again, that number's 1-844-7-NATIVE. Producer Emily Schwing spoke with an Alaska journalist about covering this sensitive topic. We're honored this year with the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service.
My name is Kyle Hopkins, and I'm a reporter and editor for the Anchorage Daily News and for ProPublica. Within the past few years, I've been focused on issues that I'd been thinking about or had written a little bit about when I was a rural affairs reporter or even like a crime or politics reporter. And I'd wanted to explore some of those themes a little more deeply, including issues regarding justice in Alaska and a lack of equitable justice and maybe even kind of unconstitutional denial of equal services off the road system versus on the road system, and some of these kind of big themes. I kind of started this formal project that last year included stories about, trying to quantify the number of Alaska communities that did not have on the ground public safety services, and to provide some context, like historical context for that lack of services, and the idea that, or at least exploring the question of whether the state of Alaska and the federal government kind of ever delivered on the promise to provide, certain basic services off the road system, and concurrently kind of a look at like Alaska's high rate of sexual assault and the sexual abuse of children, and exploring the question of why isn't this getting any better. Certainly there was a reaction early last year after kind of the first major story published. The U.S. Attorney General William Barr had declared a federal emergency, kind of highlighting a lack of rural law enforcement. A lot of money has been promised, and some of it has been delivered to improve public safety in rural Alaska. I think I would like to at some point, talk to people about if they have seen that money, and if so, has it helped? I would say I haven't delivered on my intention to really look at the court system. You know, we spend a lot of time writing about police, but I think there's a lot to say about the court system. And like, if you are like a survivor or a victim of a crime, or if you're accused of a crime, you know, are you treated differently depending on where you live and kind of who you are? Is it, you know, do you experience a different court system than other Alaskans? So I think it would be great to not hear or not talk to people and hear again and again and again this experience of, you know, reporting a crime and being disappointed in the response. And, you know, conversely, like if, you know, if someone is accused of a crime, that they're going to be treated fairly, basically just that like the system works as intended, and you don't have this giant disparity based on something you don't have control over necessarily, which is just, you know, where you live, where you were born.
That was reporter Kyle Hopkins. This week, elders and young people were able to connect virtually for the 2020 First Alaskans Elders and Youth Conference. Elders kicked off the event sharing stories and knowledge.
This is my father, Harold Ismalka, from originally from Huslia and adopted. He was born to Lucy Vent from Huslia and adopted by Martha and Peter Ismalka of Navajo. He just celebrated his 90th birthday on October 6th, so here he is.
Well, I grew up in a period of time when there was quite a transition with the people of the interior, the native people of the interior, in their lifestyle, in their language, in their education, and their religion also. So it was quite a transitional period of time. I was raised in, like my daughter said, I was born at between Caltag and Nulato. And it was a very difficult period of time during the Depression, and it was 1930. And I was adopted out because of the difficulty of raising a child during that period of time. I was adopted to an Indian family, the Martha and Peter Ismalka from Nulato, and raised in a real subsistence lifestyle where they did the semi-nomadic lifestyle of moving with the seasons, just as a matter of a way of life. The spring camp, the fall camp, the winter camp, the summer camp, that time of moving with the cycle of the year. So it was a very difficult period of time. However, it was a very happy period of time for me. Being a youngster and growing up, I never knew of any real difficult times, of any period of hunger or anything like that. The family always provided for us mainly off the land. And so as far as schooling, there was very little opportunity for schooling because of the movement from one place to another. So I never really got any basic grade school. However, when my father passed away in 1942, one of his last wishes was for my mother to send me to Holy Cross Mission, which was a Catholic boarding school. It was an orphanage, is what it was. So in 1942, that's where they sent me. And I managed to get a little schooling there and made it to the 6th grade until I was at the age where I was more adaptable, or had more of an opportunity to go to a trade school rather than the grade school. So they put me into shop training and as learning the basics of mechanics. So really that's what I became as my trade as a mechanic. And I stayed at the mission until I was drafted into the service in 1951. And that was my first time off the Yukon into the service. However, I never did get out of Alaska. I spent my basic training at Anchorage, at Fort Richardson, and then transferred to Ladd Field at Fairbanks. One of the things that always was with me is the fact that the people are very resilient, they're very adaptable, and that I think was their biggest survival help than anything else, was their adaptability and the ability to continue on and change. So, and it comes on gradually. It's kind of forced on you, but you adapt to it and that's a very difficult thing to be able to adapt. Some can adapt easily and others have difficult time doing it. And so we have to just do it a day at a time. One of the things that I must say is along the way, as you work hard and get along with people that are in a position will always reach out to help you. And that has been one of my greatest help that I've had, is from people that were in a position, as they see you're struggling, as they see you're trying hard, they will be helped. They will reach out to help you. And I think that's the goodness in people.
Those were some words from an elder shared this week at the First Alaskans Institute's Elders and Youth Conference. Thank you for tuning in to Alaska's Native Voice. I'm Antonia Gonzales.
AFN, Alaska's Native Voice, produced and directed by Antonia Gonzales and Emily Schwing. Broadcast support provided by the Siri Foundation, Cook Inlet Lending Center, South Central Foundation, Chalista Corporation, Manilik Association, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, and Rasmussen Foundation. This is a production of KNBA, Kawanak Broadcast Corporation, and Native Voice One, the Native American radio service.